In this video today, let's talk about random orbital sanders. Fun stuff. Okay, so maybe you've watched my last video, which is all about different types of sanders, power sanders that you can get. And if you missed it, it's right up there. But it talks about how and when you select certain sanders. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the random orbital sander. And the reason I selected this one is this is the one that you're most likely going to buy first. And this is the one I'd recommend that you buy first if you're going to get a hand-powered sander. The reason that these are so popular is that vibrating sanders or finish sanders just vibrate back and forth. The pad just vibrates in sort of a semicircle a little bit. The random orbital sander vibrates, but it also spins. So as this is vibrating back and forth, it also rotates around. And that's going to give you a faster cutting on the work and get you down to a smoother finish quicker. And hopefully it doesn't leave marks in the wood that are as obvious as just a vibrating sander, because it's going to be random. Now you notice that I have 4 of them here, and I generally like to have a sander for each grit that I use, and I generally work progression with my grits, which I'll talk about in a little bit here. But I also have them in the order that I purchased them. This is the first one that I purchased, and this was the second and third, and then I just recently purchased this one here. So you have to think about what the purpose of your sander is going to be now. And Porter-Cable is a good brand. All these are good brands. I can't really say that one works better than the other. They all work extremely well, and they've all stood up to quite a bit of use for me. But when I purchased this one, there was no battery option. Now there are battery options for the sander. So you notice that I don't have any battery options here, mainly because the batteries still are about twice the price as a power cord. Now, I'm not going to say that this isn't a hassle with the cord. It is a little bit of a hassle, but you get used to it. And if you start using a vacuum system with it, then that's going to be with the vacuum. So there's really no benefit in getting it battery operated. You don't have to worry about it quitting on you. You can go all day without having to recharge the battery. And the other thing too is that when that battery finally does die out, which it will die out, eventually it'll stop holding charge and you have to go purchase a new battery, then you're going to be in for a sticker shock, because a lot of times the batteries are almost as much as the unit itself. Now again, like I said, you can get 2 of these, roughly 2 of these, for the price of one battery operated one, especially like this rigid here. I think it's $69, it's $129 for the battery operated one. So I'd rather get 2 sanders that are electric powered. It's my personal preference. So the other thing that you look for on a sander is, or the options that you have, are variable speed. Now variable speed sounds like a good deal, and you can tone it down if you're getting light sanding, stuff like that. I've never really found that to work for me. This variable speed one that I have, it's on 6. That's the highest it goes. It's never been off of 6. I've not noticed anything different. If I want it to be a light sand, I just don't press down as much as lightly sand over or something. I don't worry about the variable speed, so I'm not sure that you really need to concern yourself. Generally, there'll be a little bit more for the variable speed. Now, when I purchased this one, this is the first one I got, and I got a Porter-Cable because I know that Porter-Cable's good ones. I actually had to replace this just recently. This had finally wore out and come apart, so I had to replace that. Probably because I pushed it down too much, which I shouldn't do. The second one here actually was on sale from a company that was going out of business, and they had it on sale and was a heavy-duty Porter-Cable, so I thought, oh, I want that. I bought the rigid because the rigid, they recently came out with advertising that they have a lifetime guarantee on everything. If you sign up, your thing is guaranteed for life. So I thought that was a pretty good deal, especially when I started buying battery-operated things. I thought, well, that would be good to have. So that's the reason I bought the rigid, actually. And recently I bought this one, and the main reason I bought this one is for the dust collecting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. These all have different hole patterns for the vacuum for sucking up the dust. Now, They all have bags. This one, I don't have the bag on because I use the vacuum system on it. But even with the bag on it, it still throws out a lot of dust because it does suck it up into the bag, but then it also ends up flying out this edge right here, and you don't have a constant vacuum suction coming through it. So when you hook up a vacuum, you get a lot better results as far as dust collection and dust control. Now, that's the reason that I purchased this one, and probably the reason why I will end up selling these eventually and getting all of this is because it has a nice connection for the vacuum. Now, all of these can hook into a vacuum. I mean, I've jerry-rigged this one here to, you know, hook it into the vacuum. This one here has a square opening, which makes it rather difficult to hook into a vacuum. So, you know, it's just kind of hard. This one has an unusual connection, but it does have a hose opening right here, which is pretty close. So it's not too bad. So you can find a vacuum that will fit on that. But if you go online and you read about it, you find that a lot of people have issues with vacuums trying to get them onto these. So when I saw this one had a positive lock, and let me see if I can get this for you. I thought, well, this is what I want. It has a positive lock. Now, it's not the easiest thing to get on and off, that's for sure, but it is a positive lock on it. And so it doesn't go anyplace, so it stays on there. And again, like I said, I don't worry about the cord so much because I can just Velcro this cord to this vacuum right here, and that's all one unit, and I got to have that anyway. Now, when I'm sanding inside, I definitely use this one because this one picks up a lot of the dust, and you don't have as much in the air. All of these, I have a sanding cart that you can see in this video right here that I made out of a Rockler table, and I always roll that outside my garage and then sand out there because, you know, this goes everywhere. And I always, whether I'm using a vacuum or not, I always have the mask on. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, sanding disc that you're going to put on here now. Like I said, you have a bunch of different openings here. And this one's probably the least amount, it has 5 openings there. So this particular one fits onto this sander right here. And it does an okay job of getting up the dust, but you want it to have as many openings as possible. So like the more openings, you see that the later ones all have a lot more openings. And then you have sanding discs that have these universal type drill holes here to try and expose as many openings, as many of the vacuum openings as possible. But they still don't always hit just right. Now, one of the things I recommend is that you blow off this. You notice how the dust is on there. I generally blow off all of my sanders once I'm done. And that just keeps them clean for the next time, and it just prevents buildup. When you have the discs though, when you pull them off, you'll notice that you can't really see the grit anymore. So right before I put them on, I always take a Sharpie and I write what the grit is on it, and then I put it on there so that when I pull it off, I know this is 150 grit. If you don't do that, you know, I can still see that this is 100 here. I can't even see this one here. And sometimes if you blow them off with compressed air, you can see it. But I always try to mark it before I put them on. Yeah, this one you can't even see at all. This one's completely obliterated. And you see that that paper is still good, but you just can't see the grit. So if you want to put it back on, you don't know what it is once you pull it off. Now, I mean, you can probably figure it out, but it's not easy to know. So the other thing that I do is, the reason I have 4 sanders is that I start out with 80 grit, then I go to 120, then I go to like 150, and then 180 or 220 or above, depending on what type of wood I'm working with. Sometimes my final grit will be 220 or 320, but very seldom do I go above those, above 220 really. So I just like to have the sanders so that I just pull out 80 grit sand, pull this one out sand, pull this one out sand, pull this one out sand, and work my way to finer grit. Now, I have woodworking friends that won't use 80 grit because they feel they never really get all the scratches out of this, out of the wood. So, you know, if you want, you can start at 100 grit. It's a little finer. It does take you a little longer. Now, Most of your work is going to be done with the first grit that you put on, the 80 grit. That's going to be most of your leveling, getting everything smooth, getting it ready. Then as you progress through the other grits, it's going to go much, much faster. Makes your workflow efficient by doing that. So you definitely want to start out with the coarser grit and then work your way up to the finer grit. Don't think that, okay, well, it's almost smooth, I'm just going to go right to 180 because you're going to be there for hours. Always start with, if it's really, really smooth, maybe do 100, 150, 120, 150, 180, something like that. I generally skip a grit between in most cases, but I found that the 80, 120, 150, 180 works just about perfect for me as far as getting everything down. So in sanding paper and dust control, what's important is how many openings that you have here. So that way this has a lot of openings to create the vacuum to suck up the dust that this is creating. Lately, I've been going with these open mesh disc here. I like these a lot because as you can see, they're open, you can see through them. I don't know if you can see, you might not be able to see with the camera, but I can see through them. And again, when you put it on, you don't have to worry about where it goes on here because it's open. And the nice thing is all the holes are open so that the dust collection really is efficient with these grits. Now, the bad thing about these grits is that they do wear, I would say they wear faster than your normal sandpaper, and you can get some heavy duty sandpaper that, lasts forever. So they say, none of it does. These do wear a little quicker than these ones here. However, I think the trade-off of dust collecting and, the trade-off of dust collecting is fantastic. And they are relatively sharp. They do cut pretty fast for quite a while, and eventually they wear down. My friend showed me these. We actually use these when we're doing turnings on the lathe here, and we actually use this particular type, and they really work well for that, and they also work very well on the sander for dust collecting. So I would recommend that if you're starting to buy different paper, I would buy these type of discs first, and then work these out. I'm actually working these out of my progression. I have a lot of different grits with this type of paper, so of course I'm not going to throw them away. I'm going to use them all up. But as I get through them, I think I just bought a box of 180 here. So I finally worked through the 180. I'm almost done with the 150. I'll get a box of those. So as I get these older sander discs like this used up, I'm going to convert over to the other ones. So let me show you a couple of sanding techniques that I use. So let me clear this off and show you that. Okay, so here's the typical door that I generally am sanding. Now I just basically pulled this off my router table right there, just to show you. But the way that I go about sanding a surface, now this is all not even, it's just glued up, so I'm gonna get ready to sand it. So I'm gonna start out with 80 grit, and I'll have 80 grit on this one. And I'm going to sand back and forth here and try to keep the sander level and get this all nice and flat so that this is going to do a bulk of my work is at the 80 grit. I'm going to go ahead and do the edges. And now when I sand the edges here, let me see, I don't know if you can see that, but when I sand the edges of this door here, I'm going to run the sander like this. I'm not going to run it here because the reason is that this is rotating around, and so the sandpaper is actually going to sand in this direction across the door. So if I put it up towards the edge here, like right about here, now I have a flow that's sort of arcing and working with the grain across there. So I'll sand either here or like this. I won't come across it like this. So I'll try not to. I mean, if I'm first doing it, I'll probably get it down, then I'll do my finish part right here. But I will sand the top and the edges with my 80 grit. Now, once I go on over to my 120 grit, I'm gonna also go across the top and sand that, and I'm not gonna have to spend as much time on there. And then I'm actually going to come and sand the edges here, and now I'm going to roll the sander over these edges right here. So any bull nose that you have or rounded edges that you have, I'm going to do that. Now if you don't have a rounded edge, I wouldn't do 100 grit yet. I just leave that alone. If you just want to knock off a straight edge like this one here, we're going to do that with a finer grit. But with the spool nose, I would start to go over like this as I'm rotating my sander down, coming down with it. And that's how I'm going to sand that edge. And then, you might want to just go a couple passes like this across there. So that's at my 120 grit, or I'm sorry, 150 grit. So now I've sanded, both these edges. So everything's pretty smooth on the door now at the 150. So now I got the 180 grit. And again, I'm gonna go back over all of this, and it's not gonna take much. I mean, maybe a couple passes. Same way with the edges and the bull nose. And now I'm gonna just hit these edges real quick just to break them down. I don't want a sharp edge on these corners here. So I'm just gonna break it down real quick. And then now I'm gonna touch the corners of my door the same way. I will just, and generally I have it hanging off here. I just go across like this in this direction here. I don't actually do it like that, but I will go across it in that direction. And then that will sand my door. And that's the way that the progression that you should use. As you go down and finer grit, then you want to start doing your bull noses and then breaking down your sharp edges. So 80 grit for the flat edge, for the edge. Then when you go to 120 grit for the flat edge, the edge, and then maybe the bull nose. 150, sort of the same thing. And then when you finally get to your 180, you do the same thing, except now you can hit the really sharp corners of the door and the back of the door where you might have a sharp edge, just to break that down. And you can do that on all wooden pieces. So that's the method that I use when I use these sanders, and that's why I have 4 of these sanders here. So it makes it easy for me to know what grit I have and how I should sand and the direction that I should sand in. So to recap, I think that if I was purchasing today with my knowledge now that I have after doing this for many years, I think on a random orbital sander, because I know that all of these perform equally well, I really don't see a benefit other than weight maybe is one thing you might want to consider. But I think my top priority would have to be dust collection. I think that I would pick a sander that had a good dust collecting system that I could hook up to my shop vac and pull up as much dust as possible. I think that would be my priority because all these work equally well. I wouldn't consider ever again buying a variable speed myself. Again, this is my opinion, but I wouldn't worry about them. And I don't think that the battery operated, unless you're on a job site or something like that where you need it, where you don't always have access to electricity. I don't think that that's a real benefit, because if my first concern is dust collecting, then the cord is just going to follow along that hose anyway, so it doesn't matter. But that's how I'd buy them now. I think they all are great. All the products out there are great. But I would look at dust collecting first when you're buying an orbital sander. I don't know if this helped you out at all. I thank you for staying this long on the video, and please do subscribe and like. It really helps the channel get noticed by YouTube. And if you have any questions or comments, please do leave them below. I do try to answer as best I can, and I'm more than happy to share or talk about woodworking at any time. So again, thanks for watching. Hopefully, I'll see you next time.